May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O God, our Redeemer and Savior. Good morning. Well, glad to see so many friendly faces this morning in this wonderful, almost spring weather we have. As I prepared for today, I had read the readings and I had read a lot of commentaries about it. And I kept reading them over, going, there's got to be that tag. And sure enough, I kind of settled on the theme that came out of Deuteronomy, actually, most of it. And it was the theme of a journey and the idea of making a journey. Matter of fact, Deuteronomy starts with the end of a journey, right? The Israelites have reached the promised land. They're at the land of milk and honey. This is 40 years after they started. The promise has been passed down from generation to generation that they would, in fact, inhabit the land that had been guaranteed or given to their forefathers by their God. And there they were. You can only imagine how they felt at that time. This is a fulfillment of a long-told tale that they had no idea was going to come true, that they had to walk in faith to get there. And there they were. I mean, you've got to admit, it must have been very joyful. Well, I started thinking about journeys, and I kind of settled on the idea that there really are two journeys that we make in most of the time. One, of course, is the physical part, running after a cab or driving to vacation or climbing on an airplane. Those are the physical parts of it. But in reality, at the same time, there's a mental journey involved. I call it the internal journey. And that's the journey where we start to learn how to understand how we walk in the Christian world, how we live the Christian life and walk in the footsteps of Christ. This is what we're doing during Lent. Now, there's a lot of similarities in journeys, and most of them are around about those internal things and the inner journey. We share things like the anxiety that we get ready when we get ready to leave, the wonder if the plane is going to be there, will your luggage arrive with you? All those little things. Driving somewhere you've never been and hoping old GPS holds up instead of that wonderful little sign that says, we got leads are there. So this idea that a journey is represented in Deuteronomy, I think, is a particularly strong one when he brings up the fact that an Aramean was his ancestor. An Aramean was a nomad. They wandered. And he wandered to Egypt with a small group. We remember that, right? The plague, not the plague, but the famine had arrived and he went to get food. And down in Egypt, they grew to be a large group of people who were very, very successful. Until the Pharaoh kind of gave them a hard time. And they cried out for help. And the Lord answered them. And they were led out of Egypt. So now we've got the journey of 40 years. And by the way, the 40 days of Lent has really nothing to do with the 40 years of wandering in the desert. It really reflects on the 40 days spent in the wilderness while the devil tempted the Lord. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference there. And so I've had a little experience traveling. I was lucky. I grew up in a military family. We were in the Army tribe. We went from one tribal state to another one. And I guess I was, 14. And the family decided we were going to take a trip to Italy. Now, this is going to be a big trip. My dad saved up, he was in the Army, he saved up 30 days leave. We were going for a month. We planned this trip for 6-7 months. We put pinpricks and maps everywhere that we wanted to go and made up our itineraries. And then one day, we walked out and got in our 1956 Buick Special, white, little blue trim on the side. In the back seat, there were 2 suitcases jammed between the front seat and the back seat. 4 children. In the trunk was, of course, my parents' clothes, the food, we had with us the cooking utensils that we took with us. On the roof, we had our tent, our sleeping bags, our tables, our chairs, all those things you needed to kind of have a comfortable stay. So we jump in the car and take off. We're on the road. It is a joyous moment, a very joyous moment. We're happy, we're singing, full of anticipation. So we headed southeast towards the Alps, and my father and mother had decided that we were not going to drive over the Alps. We were going to take this nice little thing they had there, a tunnel. So we go and we drive up and we were on a train station. They took our money. My dad put the car on a flat car. We went into a little carriage kind of thing. It had glass all the way around. It was really nice. And a few minutes later, the old train did a little rattling sound, and off we went. Well, we had surmised that the trip was going to take, I don't know, the tunnel would probably be, an hour, 10 hour, 20 minutes. All told, we should run about 2.5 hours. About an hour into it, we hadn't seen a big tunnel. I'd seen a whole bunch of little ones. I'd seen a whole bunch of real sheer drops. Had not seen a big tunnel. About 2.5, almost 3 hours later, we realized we were not going where we thought we were going. We were going to somewhere we had no idea where it was. And just about then, in comes the conductor. Well, gotta get off. Everybody pack stuff up. Gotta get your car off the train. We're going, this is in Italy. And then when you're right, it's Fürstendamm. It's way up in the Swiss Alps. Beautiful little place. So there's nowhere to go. They said the train won't go till tomorrow morning. I said, all right. So my dad gets the car off. We find a little campground. Sweet. Really nice little campground. Of course, anyway, it was a nice campground. And the family had agreed on our drive to the campground that we were not going to look at our trip there as a bad thing. You get choices in life, and that was one of those. And we decided that no, this was going to be an adventure, right? So we looked at the town. It was sweet. It was just a beautiful, almost quintessential Alps town. And so we made our peace, spent the night, had a very nice night. Next morning, we're back on that train. My dad's first in line. Boom. We head out. 3 hours later, we're back where we started. Hey, new day, new beginning. Here we go. So a few minutes later, train rattles a little bit, and we're headed to Italy. We know. Because it's the opposite direction of where we went the day before. So 2 choices, it had to be Italy. So about 20 minutes after we started the train ride, we were in the tunnel. And sure enough, the tunnel was, hour and 15 minutes long. And then you come through the tunnel, and you have a little bit more to go in front of you. But your eyes are trying to get used to the light change. Because in the car, while we were going through the tunnel, you had a low floor lighting, but you really didn't have a lot of lighting. You weren't going to read a book. So when we came out of the tunnel, the sun was shining, bam, and your eyes were putting, and then we came around the curve, and the mountain seemed to fall away. And way off in the distance, I swear you could see it. It was the Mediterranean. And down in front of us was this green, luscious carpet, and that was the Valley of the Po. And we were now in Italy, and we knew it. So we shot ourselves towards Rome. It took us about a day or so to get there. We get to a campground. Now, we're a Catholic family, okay, at that point in time. And we knew that Pope Pius had died. We were hoping that in our trip, we knew they were right now that the conclave was going on trying to elect a new pope. And we were hoping it would happen sometime around our trip. So we pull up outside of Rome to get a campground. And we find this nice little campground with, express traffic into town and buses and cabs. It was great. So we decided, there was something strange going on. And all of a sudden, it was like a wildfire spread across this campground. We're going, what happened? What's going on? Everybody's talking to each other. In Italian, so it didn't mean anything to me. They had named a new pope. They had a pope. They were happy. Papa is what they call the pope. And it was John the 23rd. And the coronation was going to be in 3 days. So there we were, in a perfect spot to make the coronation. We decided we better hurry up, though, if we wanted to visit the Vatican, because it was going to be kind of active here soon. So the next morning, we got up right there, and boom, went to the Vatican, signed up for the tour, and off we went. Too much. After a while it gets another beautiful painting, But we saw the Pieta, we saw the Sistine Chapel, we went through the Vatican Museum, which is incredible. And then as we got done, there was one more stop on the tour. But my little sister, who was 5, and my mom and dad, they had it. My older sister, they really weren't into going into a crypt. That was our last stop. So my younger brother and I, you guys rest, we're taking the last bit of the tour. So we went down into the crypt. Now, this is sort of a catacombish kind of thing. It's sort of like a rabbit warren where they kind of dug as necessary. There's 100 popes buried there. 100. Most of them had these beautiful, marble sarcophagi with a statue of them laid on the top. And a little plaque that tells you who they were. So my brother and I were kind of wandering through this, and we ended off in a little alcove. And sometimes when you're in a group of people, you find yourself alone. Well, there I was, and I was standing in this little corner, and I looked over, and there was a hole in the wall. So I walked over and looked at it, and there's a sign there, and it explains that hole. The original basilica was built on the grave of St. Peter. The basilica that's there now was built right over the top of the original. They believed that was Peter's grave. They would not allow excavation. They would not allow archaeology. We're not going to touch it. Appreciate it for what it is. It's your faith. So I'm sitting there looking, going, that's pretty neat. I'm right there. Well, good old Peter. And as I turned to go away, I noticed that the 3 subsequent sarcophagus were the next 3 popes in line. So I was a 14-year-old boy standing there in the crypt at the Vatican, and I was standing with what was left of the church fathers. We're talking about the essence that kept our church alive. They were the ones who helped form the Christian church. And for a 14-year-old, I had what would be called some sort of transcendental moment. Whoa, this is pretty weird. And I knew something was different, and I felt very different about it. But then I realized it might have been the tug of my brother on my sleeve who said, hey, this place is scary. I want out. So, okay, we went. Got outside, got with our family. Great day. Went back to the campsite. Next day we toured the rest of Rome. Then came the coronation. So we are there in front of the obelisk, looking at the Vatican, and the Pope comes out and has a wonderful service. There are thousands of people there. They're crying, they're praying, they're singing. It's different. And then the Pope comes out, and the crowd goes into a surge calling for him in Italian. It was great. So, thank you very much. It worked out wonderfully for us. We went and got in our car and got back to our campsite, had a nice dinner, and planned our next step. We were leaving early in the morning. Sure enough, boy, the next morning we loaded up old Betsy and hit the highway. Well, we weren't very far from town. And the police were there. And they forced us off the side of the road. And we're kind of concerned, a little anxiety jumped right in there. And, what's going on? Well, next thing you know, there's a policeman kind of standing along the road. So we went up to one of them and said, what's going on? And they said, well, we have a dignitary coming through, and we're going to clear the highway. And we said, oh, okay. Okay. Who might it be? It's your president, John Kennedy. Okay. So then my father instantly snapped into them, ran back to the back of the car, pulled out of the back door. I had no idea, and I thought I knew everything that was in that car. He has a bundle of American flags, and he lines his kids up along the street and on the side of the road holding our flag, and we look, and here comes the limo. There's my dad, and we're all, doing the thing and waving our flag. And somebody must have said something, because as he came up, and Mr. Kennedy was on our side of the car, he leaned forward, he saw us, we saw him, we waved, he waved, and it was over. And we went, that's sort of the cherry on the top of a sundae, It's that extra little bit. So we climbed in our car and started driving all over Europe. But the reason I use that story is because when you look at it, we felt the same things that were probably going through the mind of the Israeli people as they moved out of Egypt. They would have been fearful of the unknown. Most of them had never been where they were going. They'd heard of it. It was a good thing. We're going to go. They must have worried about the food. They were worried about Pharaoh running them down. Tremendous amount of those things, feelings that we ran through. We were riding that train up to somewhere we had no idea. We had no idea if there would be a place for us to stay and put our tent. There was. So, if we come back to today, actually, last week was the last Sunday in Epiphany. On the last Sunday of Epiphany, in the reading, Jesus takes Peter, John, and James up on a mountain to pray and to meditate. Now, in that, there's a whole other story because there's some mystical things that happened there, but that's a different story. When they came down, they began their journey to Jerusalem. The last journey to Jerusalem. They went from Capernaum to Jerusalem. And on the way, Jesus did what he did. He preached. He worked with the poor. He raised people from the dead. He did all sorts of miracles. And all the way, he performed and gathered and spoke with kindness and compassion, which has been suggested that those are his tools for gathering sheep. So, when we look at ourselves today in our Lenten journey is not a physical. It's that inward journey. And coming up Roman, Lent was very penitential to me. At 14, and a little bit earlier, when I learned about these things, it just seemed like it was a bad time, I had to change my diet, I had to do all these other things. It was just sort of felt to me as if it were punishment. I learned later, of course, that was just being a funky kid, and it wasn't like that at all, but to me it was. So I wasn't a real fan of Lent. To me, it was sort of that time when you go and clean the ashes of your life, your sin-filled life up. And so, knowing that and realizing that, excuse me. We're now looking at our journey in Lent. And Lent to us really becomes the time where we learn how to walk with Christ, as I told you, and introspection. The matter of fact, introspection became the part that most theologians, modern theologians, which will tell you, it's not a penitential period. It really is one of self-introspection. You evaluate your life. You look at what you've done and what you need. And this prepares us for that last part of the journey that Christ is on. So, what I would like you to remember or think about today is that you need to go through a wonderful piece of literature, the Great Litany. It will spark to you things that you should be doing, you should be seeing in your everyday life. So as you go trying to look at yourself and evaluate your behavior, it's not a bad place to start, because it will give you a lot of questions. How do we deal with the poor, the homeless, the hungry? How did you do it last time? What are you doing for that? And those are the questions that we're really kind of asking ourselves. And it comes down to, it's really kind of a personal yet difficult and hard to get your head around. But the idea is not to be timid. The idea is to really go do it. And in that, I want you to think about doing something while you're thinking about your life. And that is, be thankful for your blessings. There's a lot of them. Thankful. Genuinely thankful. You didn't earn it. Things happened to you. God gave you that moment. Be honest. Be honest with yourself. I myself have a tendency to think I'm a good guy, and that wasn't such a bad thing I did. You should be awed by the love of God that He's shown us in the life of His Son. And lastly, be willing to accept your shortcomings and your failures. So Lent, then, if we look at the whole thing in the readings, starts on a mountaintop where He comes down to go into His trip to Jerusalem. And it ends on a mountaintop with a different ending. So, as you go through this soul-searching period, and you realize that it's difficult, Paul tells us, he declares to us, that if you confess and believe, and then call on the Lord, you will be saved. You will be saved. And that will happen regardless of how small a mustard seed your faith is. Amen.